Have you ever felt like you're too out of control around food and stuck in a cycle of promising yourself tomorrow will be different, then feeling like a failure when it isn't?
If that's you, you're in the right place. Welcome back to Too Much Apparently, a podcast for deep feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much, apparently.
We're Alice and Carly, two deep feeling therapists figuring out how to live in a world that often feels like a lot.
This isn't therapy or advice, just honest, messy, human conversations about life, healing, and our own brains. And if you want more of the conversation, we're building a little community over on Substack with journal prompts, community chats, live event updates, and fellow muchlings to connect with. Go to toomuchapparently.com for all the links.
Now today, for the first time ever, we've got a guest. We are really excited to have our first guest episode, especially as she is a friend of ours. Today we are chatting to Sarah Dosanjh. She is a BACP accredited psychotherapist who specialises in binge eating and who knows it from the inside after more than a decade of struggling with binge eating herself. She's the author of the Amazon bestseller I Can't Stop Eating. Her YouTube channel has had over 4 million views, and she has co-hosted 2 podcasts, Life After Diets and Feelings and Other Inconveniences.
This will be a good one for anyone who just can't stop eating, even when they're not actually hungry and can't work out why. We'll look at what comfort eating is really about, the role dopamine plays, emotional dysregulation, and why willpower was never the problem. And Sarah's also going to talk specifically about ADHD and binge eating and the surprising overlap between the two. Around 30% of adults with binge eating disorder also have ADHD.
So let's get into it. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
I'm honoured to be here as your first guest. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Oh, it's so nice to have you here. And also it feels really comfortable to have you as our first guest. Just for anybody listening, we've all met, we all know each other. And Sarah and I have been friends for a number of years now.
Yeah, we've been in each other's world since, I want to say 2018, but it must be longer than that because we met in a Facebook group for therapists and Jane closed that into 2018, I think.
Yes, you did. Oh, was it in the Grow Your Private Practice Facebook group we met, Alice?
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't remember. And then Carly and I, we also met in a Facebook group, which I think that might have been a different one.
We met, so it's quite funny actually, because we were talking about this a few episodes ago on how to make friends as an adult. And one of the things I was speaking about is just putting yourself out there and connecting with people online who you might then meet up with in real life. And that is how, we also knew each other. You actually did a post asking, is anyone else wanting to start writing a book? Because you were looking to someone to tandem write with.
No, Carly. Wasn't it the other way around? I think you put a post on saying you wanted to write a book. Did anyone have any experience? And I commented on your post and offered to chat on Zoom.
I guarantee you it was the other way around.
Goodness, no, I'm so sure it wasn't.
It was the other way around because, yes, I did want to write a book, but also I thought she's really cool. So this is a way in to meet her and be her friend.
Well, and I still haven't written the second book, so go figure.
We never did. We never did write that book. We gave it a good go, though, didn't we?
We did. We even went on a little writing retreat together.
Yes. I wrote 12,000 words and never touched it again.
I found that writing the other day when I was going back to it, and I'd forgotten how much I'd actually written. So I did get something done.
Yeah. Well, shall we get into the topic of the day?
Let's.
I'm impressed that you've written a book at all. I think that's so cool. So our listeners are deep feelers and big thinkers who are often told that they're too emotional or they're too much. In your practice, I'm wondering what kind of issues people like our listeners seem to face.
Well, I'm only working with binge eating. So I'm only working with people that are really coming because they're struggling with food, not necessarily binge eating. And quite a few people think that it's an emotional thing. And I know this is probably going to throw you off by doing things out of order, but my mind works much more chaotically because you mentioned in your introduction about comfort eating. And so whenever a client says to me, oh, I comfort eat, I always suggest, can we just try on the word like safety, like you eat to feel safe? And it's amazing how many people that is more resonant. Because when you say to yourself, oh, I eat for comfort, I feel like it really dismisses the depth of what food is actually trying to do. Reaching for food in that moment is trying to do. And the people that I work with are so frustrated that they can't just change their behavior. They think, I'm the only person picking up the food and putting it in my mouth. I should be able to decide to do it differently. But this doesn't go into the realms of the rational, cold logic. This is a feeling experience for a lot of people. Even hunger is a feeling, not an emotion in the normal way, but it all gets tied over that way, which I think would intersect quite nicely with your audience.
I really like that shift to safety. I feel like comfort almost dismisses like how agonizing it can be. It just doesn't really touch it. So, and safety, well, I guess it brings up the like threat side of things as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's similar when people say I comfort eat or I'm an emotional eater.
Yeah, yeah. And if you have a nervous system that can get stuck in one mode, when we eat, it triggers the parasympathetic nervous system. Like that's how our body is designed. Because if you were running from danger, you weren't not going to stop and sit down and eat a meal. So you eat it, triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, it calms the body down, and then the mind feels clearer. Unfortunately, then what often happens is people will mentally beat themselves up for it, and then they don't feel great in the long term. But in the immediate term, safety is always going to trump some kind of long-term goal about health or whatever it is that you're hoping to do with the way that you're eating.
I feel like there's something actually that I want to almost bring in quite close at the beginning, because I think whenever you talk about food, especially for women, weight loss is right there.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this is not about weight loss. And almost like it's quite important for it not to be about weight loss. And I know from your things that you work in a similar way.
Yes, I'm not here to coach weight loss to anybody. In fact, it tends to be the people for whom the weight loss feels so urgent and so important that get in the most trouble with disordered eating, because that urgency, that need, it complicates food decisions. If every food decision is about, is this going to be closer to or further away from losing weight, you're completely out of touch with what you might actually need in the moment. So yes, we have to talk about the desire because it's there. And some people then think, well, then I'm not supposed to want to lose weight. But I also don't think it's as straightforward as we can just let go of that desire. We live in a culture, and for many of us, we've had all kinds of experiences with our bodies that might make us want that. But I think there's something in the active pursuit of it for some people that really causes a problem.
Yeah, I feel like that sounds like an important distinction, that it doesn't have to be pro or against anything. There's lots of nuance when it comes to this, and especially with you mentioning the impact of culture and especially on women. So some people will be having the desire to lose weight, but I think for this episode, just focusing on people's relationship with food in general, or where they feel less in control of the food decisions that they're making and maybe don't feel great about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. A lot of this is going to come down to this idea of regulation. Because when we are in a calmer, clearer, regulated space, we can make calmer, clearer, regulated decisions. The trap is if I just get my eating right, or as I think it should be, that's what's going to make me feel regulated, rather than how do I show up for myself? It's the self-compassion, it's the self-talk, it's all of that that can help bring us into a place of like, okay, this isn't a life or death decision. And once you start struggling with food as well, when you're stuck in that cycle and you keep promising to yourself, I'm going to do it differently. And then you're not able to do it differently. But then you think, I just have to promise harder. I just have to hold myself more and more accountable. You're going round and round this cycle where the brain is trying to figure out, why can't I do this thing I really, really want to do? And in almost everybody I work with, it comes to one type of conclusion. Any ideas of the flavor of that conclusion?
Go on.
There's something wrong with me. Like,
Yeah.
that's the story of shame, however it shows up for somebody. And once that shame has like really got a hold of something you're very stuck in, now trying to quote unquote fix the problem is not even as much about, I just want to figure out how to look after myself with food. It's like, I need to stop feeling the shame. I don't want to feel this bad about myself. And that's when what you eat dictates, no, I either feel good or I feel bad about myself, depending on what I've actually eaten. And now your whole experience of yourself and how well you're doing in life is intersected with food.
Yeah, I feel like there are so many questions I could ask you on everything that you've just said. And I really want to come back to talking more about emotional dysregulation and regulation and how that impacts with food, because I think if anything's going to relate to our listeners, I think it will be that. But before we dive into that, I would love for you to share a bit more about yourself, about why you are passionate about the work that you do.
Of course. So in my mid-20s, I developed a problem with binge eating. My understanding of it when I'm putting the pieces together is actually a big influence of that was hormonal issues. And I think this is an interesting piece to think about too, is how our hormones also affect our relationship with food, and particularly having an emotional relationship with food. And so when my binge eating started, it was like 0 to 100 so fast. And over the space of 9 months, it was like I was hungry all the time, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night. There was a lot of nighttime eating going on for me as well. I'd go to bed full up to the brim, barely able to sleep because I was so full. And then I'd still be getting up at 3 a.m. eating then as well. After 9 months of that and my weight going up and up, going up several clothes sizes, it tipped over into bulimia because I was so frightened of the weight gain, of being this out of control. Then I think probably about 18 months into my eating disorder, it turned out I have a pituitary tumor, which affected all my hormones. So I had hormone replacement for that, which I will say calmed down the really primal hunger that I had, but I was still completely dysregulated with food. I was still bulimic. I was still binging. I think the problem at that point was I'd become so dysregulated around food. Food had so much charge around it that it didn't used to have. And I was so desperate to lose the weight that I had gained that kept the cycle going. So all in all, it was about 10 years that I struggled with binge eating and bulimia. It took, I would say, the first 2 years, it was very biological. The next 8 years was me trying to recover from this eating disorder, which was a combination of I did need to let go of the pursuit of weight loss. That was part of it for me. It was very akin to intuitive eating. It wasn't exactly following the intuitive eating model, but retrospectively, I can make that fit. And also a deeper, more spiritual level, it was about life for me because my eating morphed along the way into different things from binge eating. Those last couple of years was more of this general overeating where I just wanted to numb. I just wanted to check out. It just felt too uncomfortable to be fully present in life. So that was part of it as well. It's really hard to be succinct because there's so many levels to it, but that's a bit of a flavor. And so I decided to become a therapist originally while I was still struggling with food, not to necessarily work with food at all, although it was always in the back of my mind that if I recovered, I might want to. And then as my recovery became more secure, I started seeing clients with a similar issue and loved it.
It's so interesting that even though there's the picture of the biological piece being there at the start, that actually it went on so much longer. And yeah, there's so much emotional charge to it all. That went on far longer than the biological piece on its own.
Yes.
That's really interesting.
And sometimes therapy ignores the biological piece, and then medicine often ignores the psychological and emotional piece. That's why it's so complex and so different for everyone.
Yeah. So I was 19 when I came across intuitive eating, and I knew, so I had...
Would you mind just explaining what intuitive eating is quickly?
So I would describe intuitive eating. It is a framework for a healthy relationship with food and your body. So it comes off the premise that dieting triggers more cravings. It triggers more out of control eating because of restriction. But then if you're not dieting and restricting, maybe you don't know how to eat. Maybe you've been on a diet since you were 15 years old. So these are guiding principles. So it includes things like rejecting diets is one of them. Honoring your hunger. So that means not ignoring your hunger. But it's also feeling your fullness, which means being connected to that sense of filling up. And this could probably get interesting with the segment of your audience that's neurodivergent, because the interoceptive awareness can make intuitive eating needs to be adapted. But it also talks about coping with your emotions with kindness, moving your body, gentle nutrition, respecting your body, getting rid of the food rules, finding satisfaction. And there might be one that I haven't because I've done them out of order. And I've often found that quite a number of people, there's normally just a couple that if they put their focus into those, they'd see the biggest difference. So for me, satisfaction was my favorite. So if I held satisfaction as the ultimate, let me try and eat in a way that is satisfying. So sometimes that's going to be eating more nutritionally dense food. Sometimes that's going to be having chocolate or ice cream. But the idea is it's about satisfaction, not checking out.
Which is such a wild thing to be missing from most other food plans, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Well, they talk
yeah,
about hunger, they don't talk about satisfaction. And so you
yeah.
can have like diet plans that have everything you need nutritionally and energy wise, and they can still be unsatisfying.
Yeah. I said I was 19. I wasn't 19. I was 20. So at 19, I did Lighter Life, which completely messed me up. Completely messed me up.
Alice.
I've got an old diary where I write in it something like, I ate a whole punnet of strawberries today. I am so disgusting. And reading that back is like, oh, it just absolutely breaks my heart. But it really messed me up in terms of how I thought about food. And then I had my second child when I was 20 and I think I went to start the Cambridge diet, which is similar to Lighter Life, quite quickly after that, which was then getting in the way of breastfeeding. It was really like I was so distraught. But I knew there was something kind of in that emotional period of time where I knew that the problem was not what I was eating, which was how every other, and it was weight at that point, thing was coming at it, is what you're eating and maybe when you're eating. But I knew it was about why I was eating.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Lighter Life pushed me in that direction because they have counselling in air quotes.
Yes, I've heard about their counselling.
Yeah. But then I came across Beyond Chocolate that I don't think exists anymore, but they have taken intuitive eating, which is American, and kind of brought it over to the UK. And I trained with them actually, and I got the job title Chocolate Fairy, which I think is very cool.
Oh, that's a nice title.
You need to include that in your bio, Alice.
I do. Well, I get so weird about it because I haven't done the diploma that the NCFED do. I'm like, oh, I can't. It doesn't count. So yeah, I don't know. That's where I am.
Maybe you don't work with anorexia because you haven't done like the eating.
Yeah.
But there's such a scale of it. So many people I know.
Yeah.
We all know. Just listen to people talking.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are having a tough time with their relationship with food that aren't in the disordered eating category.
Yeah.
So was it doing that introduced you, Alice, to intuitive eating?
Yeah. So they basically modified the intuitive eating. I don't know if they came up with their own principles. I think they combined it with Janine Roth, who's another writer on it, and came up with their own 10 principles.
Was there one about being mindful in there? About eating without distraction or being mindful?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I have some issues with that, but we can.
Oh, that's interesting because that's one of the ones that I found really helpful.
Okay. Good.
It was still a restriction, and it was kind of part of the process. It certainly wasn't the answer, but because I was eating to numb everything out, essentially. So to eat mindfully, I guess was making a conscious decision to not numb out.
Yes,
And I think that, and a shame piece as well. It's like, I'm allowed to eat this food. And, they'd talk about setting the table nicely and lighting a candle and like making an event of it, which really pushed on the like, I don't matter belief that was underneath there. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not anti-mindful eating at all. There's huge benefits and I've benefited from part of it. But I think it can also trip people up as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot, because what I tend to see is that when people eat mindfully, so I thought for myself for the longest time, mindful eating is the answer because whenever I binge, I go unconscious. So if I'm being mindful, I can't binge. Boom, like that's it. And of course, when I was able to do it, it worked, which then just fed this idea, mindful eating is the answer. The problem is, and the challenge that I see and felt for myself as well, is that when you go, okay, I'm going to eat mindfully, there is an expectation that you will eat less, right? Already. And I have a rebellious part of me that would already, in a certain kind of mood at a certain time, would feel that like a restriction because it can feel like that. What tends to happen is people will do well with the mindful eating when they're happy with the way they're eating. The minute they are drawn or they want to eat in a way that they are conflicted about, in order to be mindful with that means being able to tolerate that inner conflict, which is great if you're regulated and grounded and there's a place for that. But for a lot of people, when they're starting out, it tends to go into when they want it. It's like the capacity to be present, even though how you're eating isn't how you think you should be eating. That's the edge, I think, of development, which isn't always available to everyone depending on where they're at with food.
Yeah, I think there are so many, like whichever principles or guidelines or whatever, wherever you take it from, that can be twisted and turned into, and I guess just unconsciously shaped into restriction, because that's what we're told. I think so. One of Janine Ross, I think, opens with something about, she's doing one of her workshops and she's saying something about following your hunger maybe, and the woman's like, what on earth? Like, she'd become so detached from the idea that hunger has got anything to do with eating. And I think that is just the world that we live in still, even now. This, this is 20 years ago that I came across this.
And to add on, the binge response, that really urgent binge response, in a lot of cases, the majority of cases, I would say, comes from like a part of the brain that's perceiving food as scarce. So if you have this history of restriction binging, your primal brain, if you like, believes that you live in a world of feast and famine, basically. And for that brain, even waiting for hunger could trigger that. So a lot of treatment, particularly when binging has got quite, to a considerable level, involves some mechanical eating, they call it, anchor meals, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that will help reestablish your hunger patterns as well, because our ghrelin, which is one of our main hunger hormones, learns our patterns. So if you were to eat at a similar time each day, you would naturally feel hungry at those times of day, or certainly ready to eat, and you're going to feel more satisfied. So for some people, their hunger signals are all over the place, not to be trusted. If they wait till they're hungry, that can trigger the binge response, but they feel like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I would love to ask a question for people who maybe haven't really even thought much about this before. So there might be people listening that are aware that this is something that they struggle with and know some of the language. And then there also might be people listening who have never really thought that much about it before, or maybe recognize some things, but maybe don't really think too much about it. So I would love to know, is there a difference between things like comfort eating, emotional eating, overeating, binge eating? What's the difference between all of that terminology and the different words people might use?
Yes. I'll sometimes get emails from people saying, I don't think I binge eat. Am I still allowed to work with you? Yes. So if we start with binge eating, because there's a clinical definition of binge eating, but it's also, the word isn't owned by clinicians, So the clinical definition of binge eating is eating an amount of food that was definitely more than most people would eat in similar circumstances. That's the language. In a discrete period of time, the example given is 2 hours, accompanied by a loss of control. So a lot of food, 2 hour window is given as a guidance, it's not in stone, and you feel out of control. Those three components. But as you can see, that's already subjective. So depending on the clinician, and it could be a GP that's diagnosing this, who's had an hour's training on it somewhere along the line. And to them, they might think that that's not a lot of food in a particular situation, or they might think that that is a lot of food in a particular situation. The example I give, if you're on holiday at an all-inclusive buffet, the amount that you might eat there might look very different to what you might eat on a Tuesday night if you were making dinner for yourself at home. So the circumstances matter as well. But then otherwise, binging, we talk about binging TV, we talk about binge drinking. So there's also the subjective binging, which usually when they're saying that, people are saying they are eating, it feels out of control when they're eating. But people might use that word a bit differently. Emotional eating could be binge eating if it fits sort of the binge criteria, a lot of food in one go. Or emotional eating could be slower, or it could be a smaller amount. So emotional eating, I tend to talk about it as it's a way of trying to emotionally regulate. So for many people, it doesn't look like, oh, I feel sad, so I eat. Oh, I feel angry, so I eat. It can do. But for many people, the emotional eating is where it becomes a problem, is more chronic than that. So if they are feeling depressed, they might eat as a way to mobilize themselves, to try and switch gears for transitions as well. Or if they're anxious, they might eat to calm the system down too. They might eat to deal with stress. So there's a difference between eating to deal with an emotion in time versus a more ongoing state. And the people that I tend to see, it's the more ongoing state that becomes the one where it feels like it takes over your life, because it's not just now and again.
I think that taking over your lifeline is a good one. That's certainly my experience. That's how it felt. It would be like, Again, I feel like I'm just going to quote Janine Roth all the way through this because I just have a real soft spot for her. But I'm sure she talks about food being the glue to her life.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything else was just held together with food. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And people might turn to food when they feel happy as well. They're like, why am I overeating, in their mind, overeating when they feel happy? And sometimes we might overeat when we're feeling good because we want to elongate the experience, because we want to enhance an experience. Sometimes it can even be a sense of, I don't trust this experience and I'm just expecting everything to go wrong. So I'm just going to eat and then feel rubbish again. Like it's so many, human beings are complicated and so diverse.
They really are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just sparked a memory of occasions when I might eat where I'm not particularly hungry, might be to cope with a social situation.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if you're at a family event or if you're at a wedding or where there's a buffet, you either, sit awkwardly around the table and have to make conversation, or if you go and get yourself some food, you've got something to be doing. You can just keep yourself busy, you can use your hands, you can dip in and out of the conversation. And it's a way to still be involved in something, but without all of the pressure being on you. And I think I've definitely gone up to get more food than maybe when I'm already full, just to be able to cope with the social situation. And I'd literally not even thought of that as being something that I did till what you just said. I thought, oh, yeah, that's something I wouldn't have even thought of as a different reason as to, why you might go and get some more food.
Yeah, it's the same as holding a drink in your hand, right? When you're talking versus empty hands, when you're feeling a bit self-conscious or awkward, it's like, I don't know what to do with my hands anymore.
Yes. What are these things? What are they supposed to do? How am I supposed to hold them?
Yeah.
That also made me think about eating as a reason to rest.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Which I imagine must come up so much. I'm thinking about in our audience and that feeling like you can't rest or feeling guilty for resting or whatever. Like stopping because you're eating is then a legitimate reason to stop.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
For some people, they really need that as permission to take a break because it still feels like you're doing something. The idea of just having 10 minutes of, I don't know, pottering, doing something else, not doing anything, lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling, whatever, doesn't feel okay. And I would also put in that category, it can be used as a form of procrastination as well.
Yeah.
And I often hear that on a more productive day, people are less likely to overeat than on a day where it kind of feels like, I haven't really got the things done that I wanted to do, and I ended up doing this or not doing that, and that food becomes a buffer perhaps in those situations.
Well, that links into what we've mentioned a few times. So a few times we've used the term emotional regulation. And on the podcast, we talk quite a bit, not necessarily specifically using terms emotional regulation. We do, but we talk about it in general as to, what life can be like when you're someone who has really big feelings, feels feelings more intensely or more frequently than maybe what other people have to navigate. And that also means learning then how to cope with big feelings. What do you do when you're having your big feelings? And I would really love your perspective on this then when it comes to food. So what role can food play for people when it comes to emotional regulation, or, well, more when people are dysregulated emotionally?
Well, I think when you experience intense emotions, the whole world can flip on its head. That thing that felt so true that morning when you got up at 3 p.m. when you are in a completely different emotional state, everything shifts. So what felt possible in the morning, I used to say that morning Sarah and evening Sarah, completely different Sarahs. And I went through a stage of recording a video to myself in the morning and watching it back to myself in the evening. And this was when I was in a much more navigating recovery phase. And I would record a video to myself where I would set some gentle intentions for myself throughout the day with food and how I wanted to be for myself. And then at the end of the day, talking to myself if I haven't managed to do it versus if I have. So if I have, great, pat on the back, what worked? And if I hadn't, what did I need to hear? And it was an extraordinary experience when you're feeling a certain way, hearing yourself talking to you with so much compassion that you could feel before you were in it versus when you felt like you were in it and you completely blew it. Yeah, I found that so helpful at kind of integrating this sense of feeling like I was such a different person depending on what emotion was showing up. Because I do think I'm someone that experiences certain emotions. I'm the emotional one in the family. I've got that kind of a role. I think I can be quite intense in some ways. And whatever I felt true. So let's say I was doing really well with food and I had a good day, then I would truly believe that I'd figured it all out and I would just carry on feeling like this. So I think there was a couple of things which I think I do work with clients as well. One, understanding certain emotional cycles. Being able to, even when you're in the most sort of intense emotions where everything looks hopeless, that there's a little piece of you that can go, I know that this is impermanent, that this feeling will morph into something else because it always does. So that's one way that I would talk about one of my philosophies around that. The other is that all emotions make perfect sense. I don't believe in over-emotional. I don't believe in overreacting. And they always make sense. Yeah.
We talk about this a lot.
Yeah. And this is how I talk about it. It's probably very similar to you. It's probably just different language. But how I try to help my clients understand this is any emotional reaction you have actually makes perfect logical sense as well, depending on three things. Depending on one, whatever the trigger was in the moment that activated the emotion, your history. We are human beings. We carry our history around with it. We carry our past around with it. It's stored in our nervous system. It's stored outside of our conscious control. So your history is going to be a big part of that too. And then the last piece is what you're believing in the moment. So I'm going to use a really trite example just to illustrate it. But let's say you go to work and you tell your partner, please load the dishwasher before I get home. You get home, they don't load the dishwasher, right? And you go from 0 to 100 in like rage, frustration, disappointment, whatever it is. Now, to anyone outside of that situation, to have a 0 to 100 reaction over a dishwasher not being loaded seems like an overreaction. But if you break that situation down, what you're probably looking at is a history of this being an ongoing thing. So this is not one time not doing something. If your partner is really helpful and always loads the dishwasher and one day they don't, you're probably not going to have that feeling reaction, right? So the whole history is being activated in the moment. Look at what that person is believing in the moment. I'll bet it's something like, they never support me, they don't listen, I have to do everything myself, they don't care enough to help, all of those. So when you pull all of that together, walking through the door and going up to 100 in how you feel makes perfect sense. And this applies in every situation when you look at it. And so that's one aspect. Another thing that I talk about, I realize let me pause. Let me pause for your gasp response.
You keep going.
You're doing great. I'm sat here like, you can come again. This is amazing.
The other thing that I was going to say is that I will ask people, and I'll ask your audience, what tends to happen is we have a reaction to our emotional reactions. So we feel shame that we're the one that overreacts, or we have these big feelings when other people don't have these big feelings. So the question I will ask is, what are you making that mean about you? Because we really personalize our feelings. We think it's just something about our character that we have this big response, because we're still left with that sort of shadows of voices and people that we've heard that said, you should feel differently, or you should be able to like just think logically about this situation and be rational and ignore this. And the reality is, it's not a choice not being able to. Our only job is to figure out how to navigate that and kind of have our own back in it.
I think that's so important. I was just thinking about that yesterday, actually, that the difference between our emotions being the problem and our emotions about our emotions, or what we believe about our emotions being the thing. It's such a game changer, I think. I just love hearing other people saying it. Like, when everyone comes at me and is like, oh, I just had this irrational, I'm like, it was not irrational. Let's dig a bit. We'll find out.
We will find exactly why it was rational in that moment in time.
Yeah.
But we are meaning-making machines. We do like to create stories about our experiences, about ourselves, about who we are, influenced by so many other things. And especially if we are someone who has a really finely tuned critical voice, then chances are when that situation happens, there's no room, there's no space for compassion. And so the meaning that we're going to make, or our emotions about our emotions, can often be negative ones.
Yeah, but that's also all part of the automatic reaction. So that's not in your control either. Like you're describing, the critical voice that's going to come in, the judgment that's going to come in. I think it's at what point you're able to get there, to the point where you validate. So I am big. Validate. Like the emotion makes sense. Okay. And that doesn't mean that you don't there's a place for questioning the story and the meaning. But I think what you're kind of pointing in the direction of, Carly, is that we don't rush there to going, okay, well, this is just temporary, this is this, because you end up then emotionally bypassing and getting into a fight with it, which I think is why understanding the emotion, validating its existence, then there's going to be the reaction, and that's all valid as well, because that's just part of the cycle too. And then it's at what point are we able to grasp onto something a bit more self-compassionate? And I think that's why things like your podcast, these sort of spaces where we can go to keep remembering, because our conditioning is going to keep telling us the opposite.
Yeah, it feels like the difference between like affirmations came into my head. Like how many people are told to do affirmations and they just feel false, and it feels like you're lying to yourself and it just doesn't fit. Whereas if you can be curious about your emotions, I feel like that's certainly been the shift for me, is like, what might be going on here?
Yes.
Can get me to that validate piece a lot quicker than trying to be okay with it because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. It's just another should, isn't it?
Yeah, and Judson Brewer talks about that as curiosity is actually what can break the conditioned thinking. Because the minute you go, hang on a second, is this really like, could there be something else going on here? Even just that, could there? You're not trying to exactly say to yourself, oh, it's not personal. The question could be, does this really mean this about me? Is it possible that it doesn't? Allowing your brain to entertain that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does then food come into this?
Well, I think we use food as a way to calm the system, a way to switch our state, a way to check out, I think was a big one for me for a bit. It can become a source of coping. And once that pattern is established, sometimes we don't even know why we're reaching for the food, because the brain is quite good at just presenting the solution really easily, really quickly. So this is just an example that's popped into my head, and it's a very small one, but I can remember, again, sort of in my recovery, getting better, still navigating days, I was at home and I had this, I want to go to the bakery and get a cinnamon roll thought. But it came really urgently. It was like, I need a cinnamon roll right now. And I remember noticing the urgency of it and being like, okay, well, I'm not trying to deprive myself. I am allowed a cinnamon roll. Does that mean I should go and get a cinnamon roll? But this feels kind of quite big. So if I'm getting a cinnamon roll, does that mean this is going towards a binge? And I remember having a moment of confusion. And so in that moment, it was a slowing it down and going, okay, you can have the cinnamon roll. And again, this is like goes in times with the mindful eating a bit. Your only job is to not do anything else while you're eating it and just try to really enjoy it. And I noticed so much resistance to that. I mean, the resistance that came up, it's like, I don't want to do that. And when I investigated that, I realized actually, like, I was in the middle of this boring task and I wanted the food as like a way to sort of soothe myself through this task, through these, like, I can't remember, it might have even been my taxes or something like that. I can't remember what it was. But it was something like mind-numbingly dull that my brain was suddenly like, I don't want this, I want something else. But it wasn't a conscious, oh, I'm bored, so let me go and get that. My brain just went, that. And I think that can be an experience for a number of people with emotional eating as well. It's like your brain goes so fast to the solution because it recognizes a disturbance in the nervous system, hasn't even identified what it is. And I think that's quite confusing for people as well. And this is why until we can start to have some experiences of approaching our emotions with curiosity, with non-judgment, with self-compassion, we'll be blocked from being able to investigate them. Our brain's just going to go, safety, 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 because going near this disturbance doesn't feel okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that's why it's so important for us to talk about this, because you don't know what you don't know, because those processes can be so automatic that it can just be useful to, and sometimes it's not even until you hear someone say it on a podcast that you think, oh, do I do that? Mm-hmm. But that is interesting, how you notice the dysregulation that came up for you. You mentioned about boredom, and that made me think about stimulation. And you mentioned earlier that for our neurodivergent audience, that there might be quite a bit about this that will be more relatable. So let's go into that a little bit. How might neurodivergent people, but maybe more specifically ADHDers, relate to that?
Well, as we know, with ADHDers, there's a dopamine regulation challenges going on, which increases impulsivity and increases cravings. And I think sometimes you often hear it spoken about as like the food is giving the dopamine hit, when actually what we we've seen is that there is more dopamine in the wanting and attaining of. And there'll be some of your audience who know binging who might be able to relate to this. That sometimes your mind will get fixated on like, I need to go and binge. I need to go and get the food. This happened to me many times. And I'd be in the store and I'd buy all my food. And the minute I had it in the bag and I went out, I wanted it less. Like the desire for it diminished. Didn't go away and I still ate it because I was still in a conflict and there were other things going on as well. But I think there's a piece of it there when we're looking for stimulation, when we've got a low tolerance for things like boredom and emptiness, we want something to fill the space. And also, if you look at ADHD medication, that's a stimulant, and then you look at something like sugar, which is also a stimulant, stimulates parts of the brain, it helps with something like focus. So an ADHD brain, when exposed to a stimulus, becomes calmer and more focused. Whereas perhaps somebody who doesn't might get all hyped up on sugar. It doesn't seem to be what happens to people with ADHD. So it can be a way of focusing, it can be a way of mobilizing as well. And I think that shows up a lot in ADHD because it helps to give you the dopamine hit sometimes to get moving on to other things you've started to do and move.
Yeah, I was like that with coffee. Coffee would make me feel sleepy.
Yeah.
I never understood when people would say, "Oh, I've got the coffee buzz. You can tell I've had coffee." I'd be like, "What is this buzz? I've never experienced this buzz. It's not doing what it's supposed to do." I also really related so much to the dopamine being in the thinking about, or should I say the fantasizing about. It's not the case for me that it happens with food, but I fantasize and think about and look at buying things, look at doing things, look at moving to Spain, and I do all the research. And in that moment in time, it's like, I'm doing this. And then once it's over, the need for it or the enthusiasm kind of dissipates. And I used to feel a lot of shame that I was somebody who would be into loads of things but never do them. But years later, I've realized that actually what's happening in those moments is it's giving me dopamine. It's not necessarily about someone who says they'll do things and never does them. Just doing that, I take joy and pleasure out of it. So that's just one way I could kind of relate to that, except that you're talking about that people thinking about the food, what food they might eat, or the flavor of the food, or the takeaway that they might order. That's sometimes it's a way for an ADHD brain to kind of get the dopamine, but it's in the anticipation of the thing rather than the actual eating.
Yes. And the way to tell is when you really want something, say you desire it, do you find that it regularly does not live up to your expectations? So the reality of then having it isn't anything close. If you fancy something and you have it and you're like, wow, that was amazing, that was just what I wanted, that feels like a more regulated craving, satisfaction moving forward. I'm curious if it's okay to ask this as a question to you guys, where you guys feel like you are on the impulsivity scale.
I'm someone who's typically not impulsive, but can be impulsive about specific things, but overall not too impulsive. I'm usually the think everything through to death person, but at times of dysregulation can become more impulsive as a way to support the emotional dysregulation. Usually it's through doing things like spending £180 on a plant when I can't keep them alive.
But there's so much dopamine in the fantasy of keeping the plant alive.
Who would you be if you could keep this plant alive?
It's actually still alive. It's just,
wow.
I lost part of it. Part of it died, but part of it is still going and it still looks really sad and sorry for itself, but it is still alive. So you could argue £180 well spent.
Well done. Well done. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm very, I feel like in terms of being both autistic and having ADHD, like I can be super impulsive, especially around food and spending. But other times I'm also the person that plans things to death. So it's just, both hells at the same time.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge because we know that a lot of people with ADHD, impulsivity is one of the challenges to navigate. And I consider myself pretty high, as I'm sure Carly can attest, on the impulsivity scale when it comes to everything, purchases, as well as food. And
yes, I can see you've got your expensive LED coloured lights on in the background.
I have to have them on to make them tax deductible.
Brilliant.
But yes, yeah, Carly's heard tales of me making really impulse, and to the point where I'm not somebody who gets into debt. I kind of just about keep it in check with my spending. And there will be times where I can go, okay, just give it a couple of days. And then if you still want it, make a decision then. And there are some times where, for whatever reason, I just can't. And it was the same with these lights. My goodness, they were a stupid amount of money. And I could have, if I'd waited a couple of days, realized I could have got them for a quarter of the price. But no, no, no. And I said to myself, I'm gonna give it a couple of days. I might have even said that to you, Carly. And then 3 hours later, I was on my phone and just bought them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, when you combine something like that in there as well, so this is another reason why sometimes the intuitive eating advice, which is often have all the foods around you, bring in all the foods that you find challenging, all the food you overeat, you need to have them around you all the time so that you will habituate to them. And for some people, this works absolutely brilliantly. It can be really great advice for some people. And for others, it just keeps falling apart. And they'll be told, pretty much gaslit at times, by intuitive eating practitioners who will say, well, you're obviously not giving yourself full permission. You're obviously still restricting or mentally restricting. And that's not necessarily the case. So I really needed to, in my recovery, find that balance between I needed to have some foods in the house, which previously I was not allowing myself to have in the house. But it was normally a couple of well-thought items that I knew I would really enjoy and find satisfying. I couldn't have a bunch of different stuff in because I would, in a certain kind of mood, find myself just going back and forth to the kitchen and then feeling like I'd blown it. And I was also in a good position for pretty much most of my life that I've lived within a 5-minute walking distance of a shop. And so when I was working on the permission part of intuitive eating, I would give myself what I've stolen from the police as a reactionary gap, which is normally in the police force. It's the space between you and the suspect so that you have time to react if they're going to attack you. But the reactionary gap just gives a moment, a breath to go, okay, I really am allowed to go and get this thing. Like, how do I feel about this decision? Do I feel like this is a calm, regulated decision? Does this feel okay with me? It's not about turning it into a fight. And so I think with someone with ADHD, sometimes it's finding where that line is, because it doesn't mean if you have ADHD, it's a bad idea to have all the foods in the house. But it's, I think, about finding your own line and understanding your own patterns around impulsivity with food.
Yeah. Again, having all the foods in my house was something that did work for me, but it was really like, how much do you, I think that the guideline was like, how much do you think you can eat in one sitting? And by 10 times as much as that. So there was no way I was going to be able to get to the end of it. And I think that was kind of the purpose of it. It was breaking out of the, I'll just finish it because then it's gone kind of thing.
Yes.
You spoke a little bit about how you came to work with binge eating. I wonder what it was that sparked your interest in ADHD as part of this.
Well, as you mentioned at the top of the episode, there was that statistic from Duke's that 30% of people with binge eating have ADHD. So I was working with a lot of people with ADHD. I also kept being told by other people with ADHD in my life that they think I have ADHD. Not looking at anyone in particular. And that even one of the symptoms of being neurodivergent is having a lot of neurodivergent friends. And so I'm not saying I definitely have ADHD. I can certainly see some traits and see it as a possibility. I don't know, but I think I really related to the ADHD people with what they were describing more than I related to the people who were more. I sometimes work with people where restriction is the main issue and binging is just keeping them above water with the restriction. There's something about that kind of, I guess, the more impulsivity, the more, as Janine Roth would call it, the permitters. So not the ones who are always restricting all the time. And that there seem to be more ADHDers in that category as well. And I did an ADHD weekend in my flat for people with ADHD and binge eating. And they're just so great to work with. Like they connected so well because people were just so open. It was straight to the deep stuff. It wasn't kind of this surface level, and a lot of them stayed in touch. And that's just a really, I think, dare I say, fun niche to work with as well, and underrepresented as well, because I don't think there are enough people out there who are talking about this intersection. I know a couple of nutritionists who are, but I haven't come across any therapists yet who are putting much out there by way of ADHD and binge eating. So
no, that's why we wanted to have you on.
Yeah, groundbreaking stuff, guys.
But I think that's really important because, as you mentioned earlier, how often are neurodivergent people working with doctors, physios, nutritionists, therapists, where all of their training and all of the research even it is very much on neurotypical brains, and it's kind of a one size fits all, and it means that there's more research being done into this now, but where those with different neurotypes are, can really be let down in these spaces because they're given advice that absolutely just wouldn't work for them. But when it doesn't, they're the problem.
Exactly. And so CBT is a great example of that, cognitive behavioral therapy, where imagine someone with ADHD saying to them, okay, next time you want to eat, why don't you take a bath or go for a walk or call a friend or sit down and journal? And then it sounds like, okay, reasonable advice maybe to some. And it's very frustrating for the person that in that moment that doesn't feel accessible to them. And then they have to go back to the session the following week and feel like they've failed.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, so I have asthma and I have to have an asthma review every single year. For so many years, the conversation was exactly the same. Are you using your inhaler regularly? No. Why not? I forget. Well, why don't you just put it next to your toothbrush? I do. So I don't understand. Why don't you just do it whilst you're doing your teeth? I don't know, but I'm not doing it. And every single year it was the same. And they would look at me so perplexed as to why I would just not be doing it and how I can still forget. So it's like, well, even when it's next to my toothbrush, I get used to it being there, so it kind of disappears from view. So then I'm not using it. I didn't have the language for that at the time. I just came away feeling stupid because how they were talking, that's kind of how it made, why can I not just do my inhaler in the way that they're saying? And that's just an inhaler. So when we're talking about deeper issues, things that are affecting people every day, affecting their quality of life, take over, affect how they feel about themselves. Yeah, I can something I can quite get my little soapbox about, I think. It's really sparks that injustice.
Can I ask you then how you view that now and what you do or don't do? Is it just a case that you just do it when you do remember, or is it a big problem if you're not doing it sort of prophylactically? How do you frame that challenge now?
Ultimately, I just tried different things until one day something just worked.
Hmm.
I've tried loads of habit trackers, but one time I just used one and it started to work. And that got me in enough of a routine. It's almost like I feel like the challenge with ADHD is that when we have a routine, it really helps, but the challenge is getting in the routine and keeping it going. Once I'm in the routine and it's going, I'm actually okay. What I've also had to learn is there are times when I drop off. And before I had a very all or nothing mindset, like, oh, I forgot to do it once, now it's gone. There'd be one day that I'd forget to do the inhaler and the whole habit will be out the window. But I've done a lot of work on challenging that all or nothingness and knowing that I can miss a day and still do it. I still have to battle with it. So sometimes, let's just say it's a Thursday and I forget to do my inhaler that morning. Sometimes I might still need a reset where I'll reset it on Monday.
Okay. Yeah.
But that is way better than what it was before. And from Monday that it will get me back into the habit again until the next time I forget. So rather than that's now all gone for forever for good, it's more that I can allow myself to say, okay, but I will on Monday, it's restarting. And I do restart it. Yeah. So
And
that's how that's got better.
what you've illustrated there, which is something that I do with my clients, is going, okay, like we know that this is just the reality of what happens. Like, how can we work with this? Because you could beat yourself up and go, I've missed it on Thursday. Why can't I do it on Friday? Why can't I do it on Saturday? Instead of going, actually, I find it easier to start these things on a Monday rather than berating yourself for not being able to restart immediately. And that, I think, is the big shift that can apply to so many different areas, food and an asthma inhaler.
So we've spoken a bit about the co-occurrence between ADHD and binge eating from a need for stimulation perspective. And earlier you mentioned the word interoceptive, and that feels super important for the people that we work with. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. So, as I probably don't need to tell you guys, and probably a lot of your audience will already know, but interoceptive awareness is particularly challenging in ADHD and obviously autism as well. And just for anybody who hasn't heard that term before, it's the ability to be able to sense the signals of the body and know what your body needs in that moment. So it's very common for someone with ADHD to not realize they need to go to the bathroom until they're like hopping and desperate to go. So of course that can show up with hunger. Even more so with ADHD medication, which can often suppress appetite during the day, plus the ADHD focus, they forget to eat, that wears off, and then come evening, they are starving hungry. So this is a problem or a challenge that needs to be played around with, a little bit like you did with your asthma inhaler, to figure out what works. So how I would work with someone would be really collaborative. It's no good me saying, well, what I think you should do is go away and try this, this, this. Have you tried putting your breakfast next to your toothbrush? You know, you just, it's not going to work. But I think getting people to really think for themselves in a problem-solving mode rather than a self-blaming mode. So I think one of the key basic principles that's going to help a lot of people with ADHD is to get breakfast in, and figuring out how to do that, how that's going to be more possible, how that's going to be more appealing. All of those things I think would be part of the work. But there isn't going to be a one size fits all for everyone, because like you say, when you get into a routine, it can start to build a bit of a rhythm. And you may fall out, and that will be challenging. But also planning for falling out as well. Like with you, when you say, I know that there's going to be days when I forget my asthma inhaler. Loving this example, by the way, Carly. I can just make it apply to everything now. There's going to be days when I forget this, and this is what I'll do when that happens. And so I think that's a piece of it as well. So I think I don't like the word routine so much around food, or even structure. I just rebel against it because I don't like it. I think of food plans. I think it makes me feel confined. The word I do like, and I'll offer to clients in case it's a good fit for them as well, is rhythm. Like, how do we start to build a rhythm around food? We have rhythmic bodies that want to sleep in certain kinds of rhythms. We have hormonal cycles and rhythms as well. So I think the work is trying to instill rhythm in whatever way that might look like, depending on the person's example there. And also, if it does turn out that, okay, you forget to eat and then you're really hungry at the end of the day, and then you eat a lot of food, but then you feel guilty because you eat a lot of food, it's like your body is trying to play catch up there. It's not that you've lost control. It's confusing because you can eat a meal at the end of the day and your brain is still telling you, I want more, I want more. That's a really uncomfortable place to be in. And then when you make it mean something, like way beyond, well, maybe I haven't eaten enough today, that's when the judgment starts to come in. I shouldn't be hungry. I shouldn't this, I shouldn't that. And if you think about it, if you've just eaten a full meal and your brain still wants more food, your body's not going to be able to handle another full meal immediately afterwards. So it's more likely to crave things that are higher calorie and like lower density because it's trying to get the energy in. So it might be why you might crave something sweet after eating as well, because your brain's going, I want more energy. We think hunger is just from the stomach, but the hypothalamus in the brain is measuring energy input and output over the last 24 hours, weeks, months, and probably further than that as well. So you can feel not stomach hungry, but your brain is still going, we want more, we want more. When we understand that mechanism and why it's happening, it can be a bit less frightening, and it doesn't mean something about you as a person. Like you're out of control, or some people think they must be greedy, or whatever it is that they tell themselves that they are. So those are some of the first things that I guess I would say about that.
Maybe it's not the case, but I imagine that if you are really in tune with your hunger signals, that it would be easier to recover from this. When I was 20, I'd gone out for dinner with my husband's side of the family, and his dad said something like, oh, I had a big meal last night, so I'm probably not going to eat very much. And I was like, what? Like, hunger. Yeah, I guess because of all the dieting, like hunger signals were nowhere on my register. And actually it took me, and I can't remember now, it was either 5 months or 9 months, but it was so at least 5 months before I felt anything like a hunger signal. Mm-hmm. So fullness came a bit sooner, and then satisfaction maybe came before that, but hunger really And even now, it's not something that I can tell very easily. Although hormonally, I think as I'm getting older and my hormones are changing, the week before my period, I am ravenous and it feels like something primal. It just takes over. What I have to just tell myself now is like, this is just how it's going to be and it will settle down afterwards. But yeah, just for this week, I'm going to eat more. And when you said before about the sugar and ADHD, I'm really intrigued about that. So I'm doing my master's at the moment. When I write an assignment for my master's, I will smash through a bag of Haribo Tangfastics. But I never clock the link between it making my brain more focused. I'm fascinated about that because a lot of my clients will talk about, they've got ADHD, therefore they need more sugar. And I'm always a bit skeptical because of the whole depression and serotonin and, medics saying this is what it is. And so I'm always a little bit skeptical, but I guess I can hear something in what you're saying there about that link.
Yeah. I mean, it's a theory as far as I don't know that there's been specific research on really pulling this apart, but I think it makes a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense. It was interesting what you said, Alice, about noticing people that don't seem to struggle with food seem really in tune with their hunger. I think that's the case for some, but I think a number of people who I know have the easiest relationship with food. They just seem to have a rhythm about food. They're not asking themselves, oh, am I hungry? What's the right amount for me to eat? They've just got this rhythm going. They tend to have their meals at a similar time. They tend to have a rotation of similar things unless they're going out. So they're just thinking about it less. And so you can be quite in tune with your hunger, but that can be distressing when there's judgment about it. So you could have really good sense of your hunger, but when you believe that the amount of food you should be eating is less, and we see quite clearly that those of us with female hormonal cycles experience more fluctuating appetites as well, which is why when you're then trying to eat the same amount every day, if you're sticking to a particular diet plan, I think it can really get you in trouble because our appetites vary so much, more so than someone with a male hormonal profile.
Yeah. So I think one question that the listeners will have is, okay, so if I have ADHD and I struggle with food, is it always going to be this way?
I think you can have a lot more ease. It's something to navigate because ADHD isn't going to go away. So it's going to present certain challenges, just like it's a strength in other areas as well. I think because of how my binge eating was and the fact that I have this binge response, I believe that I have a switch in my brain that can be very sensitive to scarcity. And I almost feel it like it's there. And so I need to manage that. So I don't think I can be quite as blasé about food as perhaps somebody else can as well, because there's certain things that I just need to make sure that I do to take care of myself. But that to say, it's not a battle. So I think absolutely if you have ADHD, you can get to a place where you're not battling with yourself around food. There is going to be a sense of navigating, but you can start to figure out what works for you, that then you can just have a little bit more ease and confidence and self-trust as well that you can navigate food.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is a relationship. It's like, what is your relationship with food? And relationships always take work. I'm thinking about it in terms of romantic relationships now. It's not like you just click in the beginning and that's it. It's all fine. There's always that work that has to go into it, but not so painful, I guess.
Exactly. And your relationship with your ADHD as well.
Yeah.
And with yourself and all your different parts. There's so many different components here. Which is why the curiosity, we can keep banging back to that, but,
it's so important. Yeah.
Sarah, what would you say for someone who is listening and they want to start thinking about this, whether that is overeating, whether it's binge eating? What might a starting point be for someone who's just wanting to find a way to support themselves with this?
I have a few videos on my YouTube channel about ADHD and binge eating and dopamine and food as well. And
that's the binge eating therapist on YouTube.
That's the binge eating therapist on YouTube. Also on the podcast Life After Diets, we have also had a couple of guests on to talk about ADHD there. And in September, and probably again, if anyone's listening to this in the future, I am running live a 6-week course for people who feel like they struggle with binge eating and have ADHD. And again, that doesn't have to be classic binge eating. It's just if you're feeling out of control around food because you feel like you're eating too much and that you think that your ADHD might be a considerable component of that. You can go to my website, thebingeeatingtherapist.com, for more information.
Yeah, I will ask you for a bit more information on that. Can you give our listeners some things that they might be able to start to do for themselves?
Well, I think it starts with looking at your patterns, because patterns are not personal, right? We get in patterns and we get in cycles. They have their own energy, a pattern. So with something like emotional eating, for example, or even overeating, we're all going to do it sometimes. So where are the areas in your life where it's showing up repeatedly, where you feel like this is an issue, this is harming me in some way? So it could be a transition thing that whenever you come home from work, you sit down and you find yourself eating, not making dinner or something like that. But when you look at where the pattern is, then trying to break that down and understand what might be going on. And again, the thing that that comes up again and again is often there is a tendency to say, okay, I'm just going to start making sure I cook my dinner when I get in, right? I need to be cooking more. I need to do more home cooked meals. But let's say you've said that to yourself like 50, 60 times before. Rather than telling yourself, I'm going to do it differently, I think there is something about the acceptance of, okay, this is the pattern. I'm not the person that when I get in from work is going to be motivated to cook their dinner. I'm depleted, like neurochemically, I'm depleted. Physically, I'm depleted. I am not the same person when I get in from work as I am when I wake up in the morning or at the weekend when I'm making all these promises about the week ahead. So there's something about anticipating how you're going to feel. It's like, you know, that ADHD love couple. They talk about, I was watching one of their videos the other day, and one of them was saying, like, I'm just not going to be so ADHD. Right? I'm just not going to be like that. I'm just going to be the kind of person who's going to learn to cook when actually this is something you've battled with. So instead go, I don't feel like cooking when I get in from work. This is how I know I'm going to be feeling, and trying to figure out what would I actually need then. So I think for many people with ADHD, what they need is options around them. So if we make it as straightforward as that, how to have options when you get in, that's going to vary from person to person. And of course, is some of the challenges around planning, using the resources. If you live with people, using other people to support you as well with things like this can be enormously helpful. I've had clients before where it's never occurred to them to ask their partner to make them breakfast when they're making their own breakfast anyway. And that's been a really supportive thing. So I think I've jumped about all over the place there, but I think one, looking at the resources you have, where is there for support, body doubling, all of these kind of things that can be really helpful. And then recognizing, okay, in this situation, I'm not taking this action. What are my alternatives? It could be like for an evening that maybe you have a picky tea where you just have lots of bits in and you just put it on a plate. Maybe you have the kind of meals that you can put in the oven. Again, it's moving away from the all or nothing thinking. Because if you're thinking my meals should look a certain way and they should be a certain nutritional value and all of that, otherwise, if they're not that, sod it, I'm just going to, hit the F it button and just go and binge on a load of other foods that I can just grab quickly. Trying to navigate that middle path, I would say, is going to be the challenge. But understanding your cycles, resources, and being able to predict ahead of time.
Yeah, the anticipation part. No, that was really helpful. And I think there's lots in there that people could start to think about if this is something that they recognize they struggled with. And then, of course, we might have people listening who are thinking, oh my gosh, I have struggled with this for years. They might be in a position where they're really wanting more professional support. And you mentioned before that you did an ADHD and binge eating group at your house, and now you're launching it as a course. So just tell us a little bit more about that. Is it a self-paced course? Is it live?
It's live taught, because self-paced course for people with ADHD, like some people are going to be set up by that, right? Even just as a general population, I think that the completion rate of self-paced courses is so low. And I'm so big on the connection element. Connection helps that dopamine to flow. Dopamine also helps with learning as well. So the setup, it's an hour and a half on a Wednesday evening, UK time, where we meet together online. I'm teaching live. I'll teach for 50 minutes. There'll be breakout groups. There'll be discussions. There's a week where we've got a guest coming in to do some somatic stuff specifically for people with ADHD that's tailored for ADHD. So there'll be a lot of understanding what's going on and also using each other to problem solve, connecting with other people as well who have a challenge like this and being able to bounce ideas off one another about what might actually be possible, when you're trying to navigate the ADHD and the food.
I think groups are so helpful anyway, but I think groups, especially for eating issues, are just so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love groups.
Especially when I've not yet heard anything else like this being out there, which is why I think it's important to talk about. There are people just selling online courses here, there and everywhere, aren't they, at the moment? And it can sometimes feel quite saturated. And I can't tell you how many things that I've bought and they've not lived up to their promise. And then also how many, as you said, totally sit unfinished. But when people are putting out like genuinely really good quality stuff and that there's a real need for it, yeah, I'm glad we can put it out there for people.
Thank you.
I was going to ask, when you were saying about you've got some podcast episodes, I'm like, does she know the number? She usually knows the number.
I'd have to have a guess. I think the ADHD nutrition one, I'm going to go with I think that was quite an early one. 65.
Nice.
Impressive.
Now
Nice.
I need to know. It's probably not. Probably like 103 or something. But now I need to know. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, what we'll do is we'll put all of that in the show notes anyway.
Yes.
So we'll put a link to the course for anyone who's interested. Or if anyone is interested but not yet in a place mentally, financially, you can follow Sarah on Instagram and also on YouTube. So we'll put all of your relevant links in our show notes.
I'll put a button on our website as well, if you like.
Oh,
If that's a bit easier, then for people just go to toomuchapparently.com. I'll put a link to your course sign-up page.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for coming and being on. And how was your experience as our first guest?
I really enjoyed it. I had a lovely time. It's flown by. I just looked at the time. Absolutely flown by. And it was a really good chat. Thank you, guys.
It's been so lovely having you on. To be honest, I was a bit nervous because it's only ever been the two of us. And obviously I know that the two of you are good friends. And yeah, I was like, I'm going to be like a third wheel. But no, it's been absolutely delightful having you here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice.
If you've ever felt like you're too out of control to trust yourself around food, like you've stood in the kitchen late at night, halfway through something you swore you weren't going to touch, wondering what's wrong with you,
maybe that's not a sign you need more willpower. Maybe it's a sign your brain is just doing what an ADHD brain does around food and there is a completely different way in.
next time we're diving into Too Overwhelmed to Go on Holidays. For anyone who dreams of a proper break but feels totally overwhelmed by the planning, the peopling and the pressure to enjoy it all.
Before we go, we'd love for you to come and join our Substack community, Too Much Apparently. It's a little community space with fellow muchlings where we share journal prompts for every episode, host community chats and share early updates on new episodes and live events. If you'd like to stay connected between episodes, just go to toomuchapparently.com for the links.
And if this episode made you feel a bit less alone, subscribe, rate the podcast and follow Too Much Apparently on Instagram and TikTok. Those small clicks help other sensitive humans find us.
But for now, we'll leave you with this. What would change if you stopped treating your eating as a character flaw to fix and got curious about what your brain is actually asking for?